Lyra woke slowly, her mind floating between dream and reality. Warmth touched her skin, strange, impossible warmth. For a long moment she could not open her eyes. She only listened to the soft sound of crackling fire and the breathing of the royal wolf pups near her feet. When her vision cleared, she realized she was lying in a grand room, walls made of ice that shimmered like glass, yet a small fire burned near her bed. She sat up weakly, surprised to see that her hands no longer shook from the cold. A tall figure stood near the window, his back turned to her. Frost still crowned his dark hair, but the air around him felt gentler than before. "Your Majesty," she whispered. King Kale turned slowly. His eyes, once pale as snow, now held a faint shade of silver blue, not warm but no longer empty. "You live," he said quietly. "You should not have gone into the storm." Lyra tried to smile. "The pup would have died." The king's gaze softened. "You risked your life for a creature that cannot even speak your name." "Life speaks in more ways than words," she said softly. "Sometimes in how it looks at you, or how it follows you through the snow." Her answer made something inside him tremble. For a long while he said nothing. Then with a voice that carried the weight of years, he murmured, "The kingdom owes you its first spring breeze." The price of Thawne. The days that followed, the palace began to change. Frost no longer crept across the floors. The air held a faint scent of earth, as though something hidden beneath the ice was finally breathing again. Wherever Lyra walked, the snow seemed to thin. The royal pups played in melted puddles, leaving wet paw prints behind them. Servants whispered that warmth followed her footsteps, but not everyone was pleased. Some nobles gathered in the shadowed corners of the court, speaking in hushed tones. "If the curse breaks," one said, "the king's life will end. The winter binds him to the throne. It is his power. Then we must silence the girl," another hissed, "before she melts the heart of our king completely." The king heard these whispers, yet he ignored them. He had begun to visit Lyra often, first to check on the wolves, then to ask about her village, her life, her dreams. She answered simply, but her honesty disarmed him. He watched her light candles for the sick servants. He watched her hum to the wolves in the quiet nights, and each time he saw her, the cold within him cracked a little more. One evening he asked, "Do you know why this land is cursed?" She shook her head. "They say you angered the spirits." He gave a bitter smile. "Not spirits, only one. The Winter Queen, my first love. I begged her to give me power to protect this realm during war. She warned me, a heart made of ice cannot love or be loved. But I accepted. And when my heart turned to frost, she vanished." Lyra listened, eyes full of quiet sadness. "Then your curse began from love, not hatred." "Yes," he said. "Love misused. Love that feared loss more than it cherished warmth." The Queen of Shadows. 3 nights later, the temperature dropped suddenly. The wind howled again through the halls, carrying a voice that made even the wolves whimper. From the blizzard outside stepped a woman made of mist and moonlight. The Winter Queen herself. Her gown flowed like ice water, her eyes glowing with pale fire. The guards fell to their knees. Even the king stood still, the air around him freezing once more. "Kale," she said, her voice soft but sharp, "I gave you eternity and you repay me with warmth." The king bowed his head. "I never meant to betray you. You never meant to live again," she replied coldly. "Yet you let this mortal thaw what I sealed." Her gaze fell on Lyra, who stood quietly near the wolves. "So this is the flame that melts your ice." Lyra did not speak. She only bowed her head respectfully. The queen lifted her hand and frost formed along the walls. "Banish her or lose your throne. If your heart beats again, your power dies." Kale stepped forward. "No, you took my heart once. You will not take hers." The queen's eyes darkened like storm clouds. "Then you choose to end yourself for a servant." He answered with a strange calmness. "If ending myself means the world lives again, then yes." The queen screamed and the wind shattered the palace windows. Snow spun wildly, wrapping the throne hall in a storm of white. The storm of the heart, the Winter Queen unleashed her rage upon the palace. Ice spears burst from the floor and thunder rolled in the distance. The wolves howled, protecting Lyra as best they could. Kale fought to stand against the storm, calling upon his fading powers. He raised his hands, summoning walls of frost to shield her, but every spell tore at his soul. The curse was breaking, and so was he. "Run," he shouted to Lyra. You cannot fight a spirit." But Lyra did not move. She looked at him, the king who once felt nothing, now standing between her and the storm, trembling yet unbroken. "No," she said. "This curse began with a heart. It must end with one." She stepped forward, facing the Winter Queen. "If it is warmth you hate, then take mine. Let him live." The queen's laughter echoed through the hall. "A mortal heart cannot bear my frost." "Then let it try," Lyra said simply. The queen reached toward her, but before the touch could fall, Cale seized Lyra's hand and pulled her close. His voice broke as he whispered, "You will not die for me." She looked up at him. "You once gave your heart for your kingdom. Let me give mine for you." The thaw Cale closed his eyes. He could feel the curse inside him breaking apart. Shards of cold light, pieces of himself fading away. He pressed his hand against Lyra's chest, his power flowing into her like fire and snow together. The queen screamed again, but it was too late. The curse shattered. The walls of the palace cracked open. Rivers burst from their frozen prisons. Light filled the hall, soft and golden. Cale's body began to fade into mist. Lyra held his face between her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You'll see spring again," she whispered. The same words she had spoken to the little pup in the snow. He smiled faintly. Then it was worth it. With a final breath, the frostbound king dissolved into white light. The storm stopped. The queen vanished with a cry of sorrow, leaving only silence and warmth. The spring that came late. When morning came, the sun rose for the first time in 100 years. The palace of ice melted into shining waterfalls that poured down the mountain. Grass began to grow where snow had ruled for centuries. Lyra stood on the balcony, watching the world turn green. The royal wolves lay beside her, their eyes bright with peace. She carried in her hands a small object and the king's crown. It had turned to a single flake of crystal, clear and unmelting. She placed it on the fountain where she had once almost died, whispering, "Rest, my king. Your heart is free now." The people of Vareth called her Keeper of the Thaw. Every spring, she bathed the royal wolves in melted snow, just as she had done the night the curse began to fade. The pups grew into great silver guardians, loyal to her alone, and though the king was gone, the air sometimes shimmered faintly near her, as if someone unseen still watched over her. The heart that waits years past. The land of Vareth bloomed once more. Flowers of pale blue, the color of frost and sky mixed, covered the hills. Lyra lived quietly in the palace, kind and wise, yet her eyes always held a trace of longing. One winter evening, snow began to fall again. But this snow was soft, not cruel. The wolves howled gently as if welcoming an old friend. Lyra walked to the courtyard with a basin of melted snow to wash the pups, smiling as she worked. The world was peaceful now. Then suddenly the air grew still. The snowflakes hung suspended in midair. The torches flickered when once, twice, and then steadied. A shadow moved behind her. "Who's there?" she asked softly, turning. A man stood a few steps away, tall and familiar. His cloak shimmered faintly, half frost, half sunlight. His eyes, no longer frozen, no longer hollow, held the same silver-blue warmth she had once seen. "Cale," she breathed, tears filling her eyes. He smiled gently. "You kept your promise. You brought spring." She took a slow step forward, afraid that if she blinked, he would vanish. But he did not. He reached out his hand, and where his fingers touched hers, the snow melted into shining drops of water. "The curse ended," he said softly, "and still I found my way back." Lyra laughed through her tears. "Then maybe even winter can learn to love again." The wolves howled in joy. The snow turned to rain, falling gently over them both. And as the dawn light spread across Vareth, the frost-bound king and the Keeper of the Thaw stood together, not of ice or sorrow, but of life reborn. End of Part 2. The kingdom of Vareth had forgotten what warmth felt like. For 100 years, snow never stopped falling. The rivers slept under glass and trees wore crystal branches that never bloomed. The wind sang only one song, the song of endless winter. High above the frozen city stood the palace of ice where King Cale Varandir ruled. He was called the Frost-bound King, for even his breath turned to mist before it touched the air. Legends whispered that he had traded his heart for power to save his people long ago, and since then the sun had never risen the same way. People spoke of him with both fear and sorrow. He was strong, yes, but lonely beyond measure. His throne was carved from a single block of ice, and his crown glimmered with frost instead of gold. No one dared to smile in his presence. One cold morning, a small caravan entered the palace gates. A young woman walked among them, her cloak torn, her boots wet with snow. In her arms she carried a basket covered with wool. When she lifted the cloth, tiny sounds came from within, the cries of newborn wolf pups. The royal guards stopped her at once. "You cannot bring beasts into the king's palace," one barked. "They are royal blood," she answered softly. "Born of the silver wolves that guard your borders. I found them freezing near the river." The guards hesitated. The royal wolves were sacred to the throne. Their bloodline had always been tied to the king's family. If they died, it was a bad omen. Word reached the palace steward, and soon the woman was brought before the court. The throne hall shimmered with pale light, its walls lined with icicles that reached the floor. King Kale sat on his throne, silent, his eyes as cold as the glacier beneath his feet. The woman knelt, clutching the basket. "My name is Lyra," she said, her voice trembling but honest. "I saved them from the storm. They need warmth, or they will not live." The court murmured. The king did not move. For a long while he seemed carved from ice itself. Then he spoke, his voice deep and hollow, echoing across the hall. "There is no warmth in this kingdom," he said, "and no life that dares to defy the cold." Still his eyes drifted to the basket. A faint sound came from within, a pup whimpering softly. For the first time in years, something like hesitation flickered in the king's gaze. "Keep them alive," he ordered. "If you can." That was all. Then he turned his head away. The silent palace Lyra was given a small chamber near the kennels, a place where frost never melted. Servants avoided her, whispering that she would not last long. But she worked from dawn until the moon rose. She built a small fire from what wood she could find, though fire was forbidden in most parts of the palace. She filled a copper basin with snow and melted it over the faint flame. When it turned to water, she gently bathed the wolf pups, humming softly as she worked. Their fur began to shine silver again. Their tiny hearts beat stronger. It was said that in the Frost King's realm, even tears froze before touching the ground. Yet when Lyra's tears fell that night, they stayed warm. The next morning, a guard came running to the throne room. "Your Majesty," he gasped, "the servant melted snow within the palace and the pups live." The court was silent with shock. The king rose from his throne, his cloak trailing frost behind him. "Snow does not melt in my kingdom," he said, his tone darkening, "unless something living dares to defy my curse." He summoned her at once. The king's warning Lyra stood before him, head bowed. The hall was colder than ever, filled with mist that coiled like smoke. The king studied her, his eyes pale as the moon. "You melted snow," he said. "Tell me how." "With fire, my lord," she replied softly, "and with hope." The court gasped. Hope was not a word spoken in this kingdom. "Do you not fear death?" he asked. "I fear letting something pure die," she said simply. "Even if the world is made of ice." For the first time the king did not know what to say. Her words echoed in his heart, the heart he had given away long ago. He raised his hand as if to strike her down for her defiance, but when he saw her eyes, honest, steady, shining like a flame in the frost, he lowered it. "Keep your fire hidden," he warned. "It is not welcome here." She bowed deeply. "Then I will hide it, my king, but I cannot let it die." And something in him, something buried under years of snow, stirred faintly. The cracks in the ice days turned into weeks. Lyra cared for the pups with quiet devotion. They followed her wherever she went, their silver fur bright against the gray palace floors. She laughed softly when they played, a sound so rare that even the guards paused to listen. From the shadows of the hall, the king began to watch. He told himself it was curiosity, Yet each day when he saw her kneel beside the pups, whispering gentle words, or when he caught her humming a tune from her village, the silence inside him began to shift. Sometimes, when she thought she was alone, she spoke to the pups about her dreams. "If spring ever comes," she said, "I will plant flowers near the palace gates, so that people remember what color is." The king heard her words from afar. That night he stood by his window, staring at the frozen land. He imagined it green again, and for a heartbeat he almost believed it possible. But hope, he thought, was dangerous. The rumor of warmth. The courtiers began to whisper that the curse was weakening. The frost on the palace pillars seemed thinner. The air felt less bitter near the kennels. "Her warmth will ruin us," they said. "If the curse breaks, the king's power dies with it." Some begged the king to banish her, but he did not answer. Instead, he ordered that no harm come to her or the pups. "She is under my protection," he declared. And though his voice was firm, his eyes were troubled. The blizzard one night, a blizzard unlike any before, swept across Vareth. The wind howled through the palace, shaking its icy walls. Lyra woke to the sound of the pups crying. Their cage door had blown open. The smallest one, the white pup she called Ashen, was gone. Without thinking, she ran into the storm. Snow tore at her face. The cold cut through her skin like knives. She searched the palace gardens, calling the pup's name, but the wind swallowed her voice. Finally, she found him at the foot of the frozen fountain, half buried in snow. She lifted him gently, holding him close to her chest. "You'll see spring again," she whispered. "I promise." Her body trembled violently, but she kept walking, her breath turning shallow. The world spun white around her. The heart that almost beat when the guards found her. She was lying in the snow, her cloak stiff with frost. The little pup whimpered in her arms, alive but weak. They brought her before the king at once. He descended from his throne and knelt beside her. Her lips were pale, her hands shaking, yet she still cradled the pup. He touched her cheek, and for the first time in a century, he felt warmth. The frost on the floor began to melt beneath his knees. The court gasped as droplets of water fell from the ceiling. The first water Vareth had seen in 100 years. The king's eyes widened. His curse, his endless winter, had cracked. He lifted her in his arms, holding her close, unsure whether to fear or protect her. For the first time, the cold inside him hurt. "What have you done to me?" he whispered. But Lyra only smiled weakly. "Maybe you just remembered you have a heart." The wind outside slowed. The snow began to fall softly like feathers, and as the king carried her through the frozen hall, the torches flickered with a strange, living glow. For the first time in 100 years, the frost-bound king's heart began to thaw.